want to welcome everybody here. So great to have you all with us. As always, it's great I love looking through the faces, looking through the black boxes with names. For those who don't want to put on your videos, it's just always nice to see faces and names and people and part of this wonderful, wonderful community of learners. Our program tonight is our usual program. We're going to learn the last daf together. It's about an amud and a little bit. We're going to have then two other speakers, and I will get started. So our Mishnah, we're going to start from the Mishnah on Lamed Tet Amud Bet. Just if you can look in the chat, there's a study guide. You can also go on our site. You can get the Safaria there if you want. On today's page has the summary from today. It has the study guide. I did some English. What I did was the titles are in English, which should help you. The charts read Hebrew to English, so you have to read them the opposite way. But the main titles of the different sections are in English. Okay, starting with our Mishnah. Very exciting to be finishing the Masechet with all of you. We did this yesterday, which is if your fruits were in another city. We've been talking for the last while about Tchum Shabbat. That means wherever I am, I can only go within 2,000 cubits around my city. And in addition, anything that belongs to me goes with me. So now we're discussing situations where I have something that belongs to me, but it was outside of my tchum before Yantif started. So now my perotav were be'ir acheret. Now what's the issue? Again, we keep going back, and I'll kind of end with this. We'll talk about it at the very end. This idea that I need food. I need food on Yantif. So we're sitting now on Yantif, and I need my food, and there's somewhere else. Am I allowed to do this? So what's the issue? If Ervu B'nei Taha'ir, the people in that city knew that my fruits were in their city, and they said, I'm going to make an Eruv so that we can bring the fruits to you. Lo yaviu, they can't, because what's the issue? My fruits are not in my tchum, so I'm not allowed to access them at all. But if I made my own Eruv, then perotav kamo, then even though I'm not in that city, but I made an Eruv which allowed me to get into that city, and my fruits were within my Eruv, tchumin, I can bring my fruits to me. Misha zimen etzlo orchim, someone who invited friends. All I can think about when I'll read it and then I'll tell you what comes to my mind. You invite guests. Lo yolichem biyadam manot. You can't send them home with leftovers, right? I remember reading one of these cookbooks, and they tell you, if you really want, have extra Tupperware containers in your house so that when you have guests and you want to get rid of all the leftovers, just send people with the food, right? You'll have containers already prepared and send your guests off with them. So here we have an issue. Now, of course, you can send your guests. What's the issue here? Of course, you could send home food. The issue is that if your guests came from outside the tchum and you didn't make an Eruv, they made an Eruv tchum, and they could come to your house, but they can't take your food with them because that food was not within their Eruv. However, there's a solution to this. And right, again, it's funny because you think this is such an issue they want to find a solution for, right? You think people in those days had so much food like we do nowadays that we always want to send people home with leftovers. Nobody wants to have so many leftovers in their house. Again, there are people who do like that, but many people want to get rid of them because I know my kids hate leftovers. So anyway, here's your solution. I can come from Erev Yom Tov and I can say to my neighbor, I want you to accept ownership rights for these people. And then you can, at that point, he accepts the Eruv of those people on him and where they can go, and the fruits become as if they're in the other person's possession. And this is something we're going to discuss a lot today, which is an object that theoretically is in one person's possession, but we can legally turn it into someone else's possession for the purposes of Eruv, so that you can carry things into the other person's Eruv and not your own, not necessarily only yours. So here starts the Gemara, Itmar. Itmar is always an introduction to a machloket Amerongen. Hamafkid perot etzel chavero. So somebody gives somebody fruits to watch. This sounds like a sugya in Bava Metzia, where we're going to learn in Bava Metzia when we get there all about shomrim, somebody watching my item. So I give you my fruits to watch. The question is, it's in your house. You have a different Eruv tchumen than I do. Let's say you made an Eruv going, in a different direction than I did, or you live in a different city. You have my fruits for Yantif. So Rav Amal, obviously the question is, they're my fruits, but they're in your possession. You're watching them for me. So does that make them your tchum or is it my tchum? So Rav says, Kiraglei mishif kidu lo. It's the person who they were watching for, meaning, okay, it's a very complicated language. What it really means simply is, fine, I give you my fruits to watch. It goes by me because they're my fruits. Shmuel Amal kiraglei sorry, I think I said that wrong. Kiraglei mishiv kidu lo, meaning I've just messed that up. It's the opposite. Mishiv kidu lo is the one who they gave it to, okay? The one who's watching it. Shmuel says kiraglei hamafkid. The mafkid is me. I gave you my fruits to watch. So Shmuel says it goes by me, and Rav says it goes by the person who's actually watching your fruits. Now they say, wait a minute. We should suggest here that what? Rav and Shmuel go according to their normal shitot. What does that mean? Ditnan, im ichnis bereshut baal hachatzer chayav. Rebbe Omer le'olam eino chayav ad shekabel baal habayit lishmo. Okay, before I get into this, let's give some background. We're talking about a Mishnah here. Comes up in Dinei Nezikin, in Bava Kama, actually. And it says that if I bring in, let's say I bring in my dog into your house, okay? This actually just happened on Shabbat. I went into someone's house, we were taking a walk, and there were two big dogs there, and I walked in with a friend who had a small dog, and the small dog immediately started to get attacked by another dog, not the dog, okay, the owner is here listening, not the dog who actually owned the house, but the dog who was at that house, okay? So they were in the person's house with permission, and then they went and damaged, okay, luckily no damage happened, everyone was okay, but theoretically, if that dog had damaged the other dog, who'd be responsible? Is it the dog, the owner of that dog, or since the person who owned the house let the dog in with permission, then maybe that person's responsible because it was really her house. She should have been the one who's responsible. So here, this is what the Mishnah says. If that dog owner's had the dog that came in, the owner asked for permission from the owner of the house. Is it okay if I bring my dog into your house? And the owner said yes. Then Bala Chatzir Chayav. If any damage occurs, it's the person who owns the house. They assumed responsibility by saying you can come in. Rebbe Omer, what are you talking about? I said you could come bring your dog into my house. I didn't say I was watching your dog. I was babysitting your dog. No, I just said your dog could come into my house, but I didn't assume any responsibility. So this is, first of all, a machloket. I want to just get it clear. We started with a machloket Rav and Shmuel, and now we're moving to a machloket between two Tanaim. We wanted to connect Rav and Shmuel to their own opinions. So we're going to see their own opinions right now. The Amar Rav Huna Amarav. Rav Huna said in the name of Rav, Halacha kedivrei chachamim. We hold like the rabbis that im yichnis bereshut, once you let it in, it's right. Bala chatzir chayav. You accept the responsibility. That's why he says, right? Kiraglei mishev kidu lo. Who's got the responsibility? The one whose house it's in. So therefore, that matches his opinion by us. Who gets it? By whose tchum do we go by? The one who the fruits are in his house. And Shmuel amar halacha Rebbe. He says no until he accepted upon himself lishmuel. So likewise, Shmuel says halacha Rebbe, and lema, the Gemara is going to say lema Rav da'amar Rabbanan, u'Shmuel da'amar Rebbe. Now, what's the connection here? You have to think about this connection a little bit. What Shmuel's saying, it's kind of a little bit like an analogy. Shmuel's saying, if you accept, okay, if you hold like Rebbe, that means the person whose courtyard it is said, you can bring your animal in, but I didn't say I was going to watch it. Likewise, in our case, I said, you said you watch my fruits, but you didn't say I was going to determine what the tchum was, that it's going with my tchum. You accepted what you did. You didn't accept what you didn't. I said, sure, come into my house. I didn't say I'm responsible. Sure, bring your fruits into my house, but I didn't say they're going to go by my tchum. So it's only kind of, it's almost like they say in Hebrew, rosh katan, like, this is what I said. I didn't say any more than what I said. I wasn't going beyond that. So now they suggest this looks like the exact same machloket. But we're now going to say that each one could say, I actually agree with the opposite opinion, because these cases are not really comparable. We're used to this already. Hamar lecha Rav. Rav would say, right? He didn't say this, but Rav would say, we could put words in his mouth. Ana da'amre afilu l'Rebbe. I really hold even like Rebbe. But ad kan lo ka'amar bihatam ela de bistama lo kabil alei tiruta. In other words, I would hold with Rebbe in the case of the dog situation. Because yes, I said the dog could come into my house, but I never said I was going to be responsible for it. But hacha hakabil alei tiruta. But here I said you said you would watch my fruits. That you're watching my fruits goes hand in hand with tchum. In other words, if you're watching them, then you're in your possession, you're responsible. That means it goes by your tchum. So those are two very different situations, he says. And therefore, right, hakabi, you said you were going to do nitiruta is shmira, is watching. Shmuel said, Rabbanan. I could actually agree with the rabbis. Why? Ella, this is a great line. Again, this is all about, we always talk about this, and it's all about intention. Let's take the case I brought up on Shabbat. So my friend brought the dog to the house of the other person. It happened the owner of the dog was there. So let's just assume the owner wasn't there and left the dog in the house. Now, don't you assume that he was hoping that my friend would be responsible if the dog did anything, right? It's in his interest that if he leaves something of his, he doesn't want to assume responsibility, or she doesn't want to assume responsibility. So basically, this is what the words say. It's good for, it's in the person's self-interest or their best interest. That he basically says, listen, when I asked you, can I bring my dog into your house? What I meant was, obviously, and you'll assume responsibility if anything were to happen. Otherwise, why would I, right? Let's put it this way, right? What if, I'll use a different example. You bring a kid to someone's house and then your kid hurts the friend, while they're there, or, like little kids and someone bites someone else, you assume that the mother's taking responsibility when the kids are there, or the father's taking responsibility, right? You don't assume, oh, I'm just leaving my kid and whatever happens, happens. So, you figure someone there needs to be responsible. So it's in your interest. Right? And he didn't want to accept responsibility for any damages the animal might do. But here, now, if I give you my fruits to watch, but I want them on Yantif, what's obviously in my best interest, that it goes by my tchum, not your tchum. So therefore, in the animal case, or me putting, by the way, it could be anything I put in your chatzir that theoretically could cause damages. So if I put it in your courtyard, that's not, I want it to be in your responsibility. In this case, I don't want it to be in your tchum. That will be a big pain in the neck for me. Then I won't be able to access it. So therefore, the cases are incomparable. Okay, that's what we're up to right now. Now the Gemara is going to say, Tanan, wait a minute. We have some questions against Rav's opinion. Again, Rav said it goes by the person whose house it is and not the person whose fruits they are. So look at our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says, V'im erevhu, if my fruits were in some other town and I made an eruv, perotav kamohu. Now, what were my fruits doing in some other town? I know someone asked this yesterday, when we learned it the other day. I think someone asked, right, what are the fruits doing in someone's house? Right? Why would they be there? So if you sit, right, it says, if you made an eruv, then perotav kamo. Now, iamart kiragle mishiv kidu etzlo ki arevhu mai have. If we're assuming now, why were they in another town? Because I asked you to watch my stuff. So this is the same kind of case. Now, if we say it goes by whoever it's there, whose house it's in, then what does it help me if I made an eruv? That doesn't help at all. So Amar Rav Huna, Amar Beirav, Kigon Shichelo Keren Savit. Now we're going to learn that there's two ways I could put my fruits in your house. I could give you my fruits and say, take care of them, watch them. But you can also say, listen, you want me to watch your fruits? Fine. I'm putting them in this room. I'm not going to touch them. They're going to be in this corner. That's your corner. And then it's sort of yours. Okay. And then it's sort of yours to the extent that you can then say, well, it's sort of mine. Therefore, I can access them. If I did an eruv, then I'll be able to bring them into my territory. And then it goes by you because you put the person designated them in a particular corner, and that allowed me to be able to still say they're mine. As opposed to, I bring it to their house and they decide what they want to do with it, then it's their responsibility. So it sort of depends how it all came about. And we're going to have the same answer to the next question, which is Tashma. Again, we're going to learn from the Mishnah. Misha zimen etzlo orchim, lo yolichem biyadam manot, elin ken zika lehem manotehem erev Yom Tov. Remember, we said you could give someone the day before and say, listen, I want you to accept ownership for those people who are going to get it. Now, if they're in my house and then, right, and I'm really giving them to you, but they're in my house, I'm like a shomer, right? Like the person watching. So, what does it help that I gave ownership rights? It's still in my house and we go by me. So again, it's as if I gave them a corner of space. Okay, so that's our answer that we have anytime we seem to have an issue. Say there's a little bit of a difference if you give them to watch it or they put it into a corner for you. By the way, I wanted to just go back for a minute to Rav. There was something I neglected to mention, which is that there's a debate about Rav when he says it goes by the person who's watching it. So there's actually a debate about what he means. Does he mean 100% it goes by the tchum of the person who's watching it? Or is it one of those cases we talked about, the overlapping? It's that it can only be taken to the place that overlaps between me and the other person, and they're somewhat joint. Because some people say, they look at Rav and they say, how could you possibly say that if they're my fruits, that it doesn't go by me at all? So some people actually have a different approach to say that it's an overlap. And the other approach and the other logic, that's what's the logic of Rav? Because really, they're my fruits. Why shouldn't they be with my tchum? So one of the answers given is a really good answer, which is that if I give you my stuff to watch, let's say there's a fire in your house and you try to, take stuff out of your house. If you can't carry, maybe a fire is an extreme example, but let's say, for whatever reason, I gave you my fruits to watch. That means you might have to move them for whatever reason you might have to move them. And if I don't give you rights to move them as far as you can move them, then you're not necessarily going to be you're not going to watch them very carefully because you might have to move them and you won't be able to. So it's as if, again, it's about my intent. My intent is to give you rights to be able to move these as you need, as you see fit. So therefore, that's a reason to say that he has 100% rights. That would explain his opinion. Now we're going to have a story. Okay. Oh, wait, there's one more answer. I forgot. One more answer to this question against the case about the guests. It could be that by me transferring ownership, that's already different. That's not the same as someone gave me, I'm watching something of someone else's, but I actually did an action to transfer ownership, then it would work. So maybe that isn't even really such a question. Now we have an interesting story, and it actually has a kind of funny ending. A little bit of a, I would say the rabbis are almost a little bit laughing at themselves at the end of this story. We're going to start off thinking that this story connects to our issue, and they're going to get stuck with a whole slew of questions. And in the end, they're going to say, it must be that this is talking about something entirely different and has nothing to do with tchum. Okay, but we think in the beginning it has to do with our mission. So the Gemara says, Rav Chana bar Chanilai tala bisra be'ivra dedasha. Okay, Rashi fills in a few details for us. Tala bisra be'ivra dedasha means he hung meat on the door, okay, by the door. So now, Rashi says he was in a guest house, Beit Ushbizchine, shenatnulo tabachei irmi ba'od yom. He got meat from the butchers the day before. V'huaya ben ir acheret, sherma'avi lo lavo lekan. He was in a different city. He really lived in a different city, but he was staying there overnight, and he was planning to go back in the morning to his city, which was within, he made a tchum, right, an eruv tchumin, so that he could go back home. The big question is this piece of meat that was hanging there that he got from the butchers, does it go by him or not? So they say here, right, that's what we're assuming the question is, right? Can he bring the meat home? So we assume, can he bring the meat home, right? Where our head is all into eruv tchum, we assume this has to do with, is it considered within his tchum or not? So Ata the Kameja Rav Huna, he goes to Rav Huna, and Rav Huna tells him, even though it says that he hung the meat himself, maybe he didn't give over the full details of the story. So he says to him, it depends. Amarle. If you hung it up there, zil shko. If you're the one who hung the meat up, you can take it because obviously, right, it was in your possession already. If he hung it up, lo tishko, you can't take it. Now we assume simply because he hung it up, not you, meaning the innkeeper. It goes by the innkeeper's tchum. Now this is a bit problematic for various things that we've learned already. You might be thinking, right, that doesn't make sense. Though he hung it up for you. It should go by you. We'll get to all that. And that's why in the end, they're going to reject this. But first they ask a question on the first part, which is if you hung it yourself, you can take it. So iutale mishakil. So they say, wait a minute. Wrong line. Vaha Rav Huna talmid de Rav Hava. They say, wait a minute. Rav Huna was a student of Rav. Va'amarav kiragle mishiv kidu etzlo. Rav says it goes by whoever is watching it for you. Now, you hung it on the door of whose house? The innkeeper. It should go by the innkeeper. So how could that be? We already know the answer because this is the answer that we keep saying. Because Shana Ivra the Dasha, because he hung it on the door. It's as if he said, right, that corner of my house is yours. This door, you hung it on the door handle. That's your space. No problem. So again, if he hung it himself, he gets to take it home without an issue. However, we're now going to have 3 questions on this second section, which the second part of his answer. So the second part of his answer was, if the innkeeper hung it, or maybe the butcher hung it, you can't take it home. So Amar le Rav Hillel le Rav Ashi. So the first 2, it's interesting, are 2 people who ask Rav Ashi a question. The third question is going to be Rav Ashi himself is going to ask a third question. So he says to Rav Ashi, Vi inu talele lo shakil. Really? Why can't you take it? Just because he hung it for you. Remember, we learned this. V'hamar Shmuel shor shel patam hareu kiragle kol adam. The person who fattens up the meat, remember, he intends to sell it to people. So even if before Yantiv he hadn't sold it, it could go by whoever buys it. That sounds like just like this case. Really, he sold it to this person. The person was going to take it home. It was even done before Yantiv. It shouldn't be a problem. Question number 1. Question number 2. Amarle Ravina le Ravashi. V'inu talele lo shakil. Again, same question. What do you mean he can't take it? Remember, we had like Rabbi Dosa who said if there's one shepherd in the city and you know that you're going to give it to that shepherd, it's going to go by the shepherd. So again, here, gave it to that person already before Yantif. Obviously, he should be able to take it home. Third question, which is a bit of a strange question. Rabbeinu Chanal actually has a different gear sense, says that wasn't the line in the Mishnah that he really was quoting as a question. It really is a different line, but we'll just explain it simply like this. Amarle Rav Ashi le Rav Kahana. Inu talele lo shakil. Again, same question. He can't take it. It says in the Mishnah, your animal and your utensils, everything goes by you. And again, if you go with the simple reading here and not that there's a different girsa, some people say it should be the case where someone borrows something. But in any case, at this point, it was his. He owned it. It should go by him. So you should be able to bring this home. To which the Gemara says, and here's the funny line, which is really I think the rabbis are a little bit mocking themselves. Elashani Rav Chana bar Chanilai, Degaver Rabbahu, who was a great rabbi, right? So you think they're going to say really good things about him. Vitari Bishmate, he was very distracted, okay, right? Absent-minded, you could say. Okay, people who are sitting and they're learning all the time, they get very absent-minded and he wasn't paying attention. This is what Rav Huna's psak is. This has absolutely nothing to do with tchum. The question is, can you bring it home or not? Can you assume that the meat is kosher or not? Now, why is there a question of the meat being kosher? If you remember, or maybe we haven't learned it on this, I think we learned it in Eruvin actually, about this concept of basar shenitalei min ha'ayin. Meat that you didn't, right? You don't know what happened to it. You took your eyes off it. It's like the 9 stores. It's a little different, but it's this concept that meat that you were watching it, and then you turned away, and then you look again. Maybe a bird came and snatched the meat and put a different piece of meat in its place. And how do you know it's the same piece? So, says like this. What does the distracting thing have to do with it? He says the following. If you hung it up, he says 2 things. You know what the piece of meat looked like. If you hung it yourself, even though you're absent-minded, you probably kind of looked at it. And lo masich da'ate mineh. You knew it was there, so you knew that if you didn't pay attention to it, it was going to become basar shenitalei min ha'ayin, which means maybe someone switched the meat, and maybe it's not the same piece. So you were paying attention. However, that was the first part of what Rav Huna said. And therefore, zil shkol, you can take it. The inu talulach, but if he hangs it for you, okay, this is classic. Okay, if you don't do something yourself, you often don't really remember that it happened. Right? If you do something yourself, you'll remember that. Someone tells you, listen, I left a piece of meat for you. Right? How many times this happened? I'm just remembering now. This happened today. Somebody left me a key. Okay. I said, leave it in my mailbox. I'll go get it. I totally forgot because I didn't do it. I had nothing to do with it. Said he was leaving me a key. It happens to be sitting in my mailbox right now because I'm distracted. Right? So that's exactly what happened here. If he hung it for you, masif datif, v'lo tishkol. You're not going to pay attention and watch that piece of meat because it didn't really enter your head to notice that it was there for you. So therefore, you didn't pay attention. And therefore, it might not be kosher meat at this point because somebody might have swapped the piece and you have no way of knowing that it was the same piece. There's really 2 issues. One is you didn't really look at it and pay attention to the details of it. And number 2, you weren't paying attention all the time and keeping your eye on it. So what means nitalei min ha'ayin? It means you weren't looking at it all the time. didn't see. So maybe something had happened. And that's why I couldn't take the meat. It had absolutely nothing to do with this. It's a classic case of, comes into a suffix. We're going to hear more from Jen later about Sveikot. So that's our lead-in. Okay, last Mishnah of the parak. A little bit of a strange Mishnah, I have to say, because we were on the topic of Tchum, right? We dealt with Muktzah in the beginning of the Masechet, and we dealt with it in the middle of the Masechet, but then we got into Erev Tchumin. And all of a sudden, the Mishnah goes back and almost mentions things from the very beginning of the Masechet. Remember, we talked about birds, and you had to designate them, otherwise you wouldn't have intended to slaughter them. Now we're going to talk about animals. They're different than birds, because animals, if they're your animals, you intended likely that you might want to slaughter them. So, ein mashkim v'shochatin et hamidbariya. We're going to distinguish between two types of animals. There's ones that live out in the desert, and there's ones that are more domesticated. Aval mashkim v'shochatin et habayatot. You can't water and it sounds funny in English, right? Water and slaughter. You can't, hose them down, right? Get them wet and slaughter them on Yantif if they're desert ones, but you can do it if they're domestic ones. Eluhem bayatot. So we obviously want to define, what does it mean domestic? What does it mean midbariyot? Bayatot or halanot, but you're the ones who sleep in the city, midbariyot, halanot ba'afal, the ones who sleep out in the pasture. So the Gemara says, what does this mashkim have anything to do with it? It's not a malacha, lashkot, to pour water on an animal. So he says, Milta agavorche kamashma, and teaches you something, by the way. It's actually better, easier to flay the hide of the animal, to take it off, when you water the animal first. So because of that, this becomes a yantif need, and therefore you can do it on yantif only if you can slaughter the animal. Can't slaughter the animal, you can't. But it's teaching you something about how it worked with animals. Tanu Rabbanan. But now we get to the main thing, which is, okay, now we have a debate about midbariyot and bayatot. In our Mishnah, it gave us a very clear-cut definition. Now we're going to have a debate. Eluhem midbariyot ve'eluhem bayatot. Midbariyot kosh yotzot bepesach v'ro'ot ba'afar v'nichnesot b'revi'ah rishona, which is right now when the first rains come in Cheshvan. So the animals, these are animals that go out after Pesach or around Pesach time. They go out to graze. They come back in the rainy season. Those are midbariyot. What are bayatot? They go out and they go far, but they always come back into the tchum of the city to sleep. So ones that sleep out for, let's say, 6 months of the year, those are midbariyot. The ones who sleep out, who sleep at home always, or sleep within the tchum anyway, those are bayatot. But there's a machloket about this, okay? Not everyone agrees. That's one. But Rebbe Omer, elu ve'elu bayatotim, those are both domesticated, because in the end, those come back in the rainy season. So they're still called domesticated. But what are midbariyot, which are considered muktzah, right? He's going to basically say there's less ones that are considered muktzah, right? But the whole idea here again is, if I'm going to slaughter an animal, did I have in mind I was going to slaughter this animal? Not if it was not in my house at all or far off. So the question is, how far off did it have to be? So according to Rebbe, only if it's Yotzof V'Ro'op Afal Ve'enif Nesot L'Yishuv Lo B'Yamad HaChamal Lo B'Yamad HaShamim. It never comes back. It's always grazing out, right? You see those people, shepherds. I mean, I don't know how often you see them, but in Israel, sometimes you see these shepherds, right? They never bring their sheep back. That's called, those are the ones that you can't slaughter because they weren't ready at all. Well, the Gemara is going to have a very odd question. And why is this an odd question? Well, Rebbe is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who put together the Mishnah. Now, we've been learning this entire Masechet. We've dealt a lot with muktzah and all those issues. All of a sudden, they asked this question. Wait a minute. Rebbe, you said, now it's true he had a narrower definition as to what was muktzah, but he does say those animals are muktzah. So they now say, wait a minute. Miyeh little Rebbe muktzah? Does Rebbe really hold by muktzah? Rabbi Shimon, but remember the big famous machloket, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda, do we have muktzah? Do we not hold muktzah? So here we go. We're going to try to prove, right? Until now, notice we never asked what Rebbe holds about this. But now we're going to say, wait, this seems to imply Rebbe holds muktzah, because he says, if they're ones that don't live in the city, you can't slaughter them. They're muktzah, even though you didn't, right? The only way, we'll see this in a minute, Rabbi Shimon holds muktzah in grogrofet simukim, which were ripe, and then you put them on your roof and you said, I want to dry these out. I don't plan to ever use them. And you push them off. It's called dacha'o b'yadayim. You basically said, I don't intend to use this. But if you didn't say that, anything short of that would not be muktzah. Now, according to Rebbe, if you have these animals who don't live ever at home, in the city, they're muktzah. So it sounds like Rebbe holds muktzah, but, and it's a very strange question against Rebbe, because Rabbi Shimon bar Rabbi mi Rabbi Shimon, his son, asked Rabbi, Patzilei Tmara Rabbi Shimon Mal. These are dates that never ripen on the tree. You put them in a basket so that while they're in this basket, they'll ripen. Now, that's not the same as Gorgod and Simukim because you didn't push them off. They were never ripe to begin with. The issue with Gorgod and Simukim is that they were good, and then you push them off and said, well, I don't want them until they fully dry. This is a little bit different. So they asked, according to Rabbi Shimon, they asked Rabbi, is this muktzah or not? So Amar Lei, ein muktzah Rabbi Shimon, ela Gorgod and Simukim bovat. No, he doesn't know muktzah, only Gorgod and Simukim. To which they say, so there you see, Rabbi holds there's no muktzah. Now, it's a little bit of a strange question because he asked the question according to Rabbi Shimon. He didn't ask the question, Rabbi, what do you think? He said, what about Rabbi Shimon? So that's going to be one of the answers. It's a little bit of a strange question. But anyway, the Gemara answers, Ibai Gema, we're going to introduce each by, you could say this, or you could say this. 3 possible answers. Hanenami, you could say that those dried, you're basically trying to ripen those dates. That's just like the figs and the grapes that you're trying to dry out. It's no different. So then you could say, right, that would explain why he holds that, right? That he basically does hold like Rabbi Shimon. I just said that wrong. My confusion. What he's saying is that the animals, the midbariyot, are like Rogrofet Simukim, because you really said, I don't want them ever coming into the town. So they're really like you push them off. Okay, that's one. Which is the way we understood the question. What do you mean? He was asking about Rabbi Shimon's opinion. He wasn't asking about Rabbi's opinion. Rabbi was just giving Rabbi Shimon's opinion. A third possibility. He was actually speaking according to the rabbi's opinion. What he said is like this. Lididi ain muktzah. I don't believe in muktzah at all. I'm like Rabbi Shimon, right? But lididchu. But when he said about these animals, the midbariyot, he said, listen, at least odu limia, at least admit to me. At least agree with me on this issue, that if they do come back at some point, those are called domesticated. And then, Amrulei Rabbanan, lo midbariyoten. In other words, he wasn't talking according to his opinion. His opinion is really like Rabbi Shimon. There is no muktzah, but he was saying, according to you, the rabbis, right? He was trying to put words in their mouth. At least you'll admit with me this. No, and they don't. Okay, with a very strange way, we end the Masechet on those words. Okay, with that Hadran alach mashilim perodu slika Masechet Beitzah. Very strange end to the Masechet. Strange because first of all of a sudden at the end we're bringing up muktzah again. Also, we're getting into Rebbe, like what Rebbe, we don't know what he holds about muktzah. Like all this time, he's the one who put together the Mishnah, and we're asking this question where he was saying, according to Rabbi Shimon, it's a very strange end to the Masechet. I think there's a little bit of this issue of, don't try to put words into people's mouths, a little bit of that. Anyway, it ends with a lot of lack of clarity. If you have to talk about one topic, which is something that Jen is also going to introduce in her talk about this lack of clarity. And I think when I look back at the Masechet and I think about what this Masechet is all about, right? You do a zoom out. It's always hard to do that when you're doing Daf Yomi. But really what went on in this Masechet all over was balancing. We balance Simchat Yom Tov. Remember all those sugyas? Oh, what do you mean? Beit Shammai looks like he's machmir about Simchat Yom Tov, or he's mekel about it, right? We have this issue. We want to eat on Yom Tov. We want to eat fresh food. But we also don't want to do malacha that we're not allowed to do. We don't want to do things that look like a weekday because then people will come to not take Yom Tov seriously and get confused about what exactly is the nature of Yom Tov. We have muktzah issues, right? It's all this balancing. How do we balance our need to eat and have fresh food and also balance that with all the prohibitions? And I think in general, right, our lives are all about this balancing act of we have conflicting interests, things pulling us in different directions. And I think what the Masechet is ending with, and I think it's really something good for a Daf Yomi learner, which is, I know a lot of people feel very often in Daf Yomi that, and myself included, that we just keep moving at a frenetic pace and you don't remember everything. And you come out of a sugya, sometimes you say, well, what's the halacha? And what was the bottom line? And I'm confused a little bit. But what are we getting when we learn Daf Yomi? We're getting all the concepts and the ideas behind everything. And there's not always clear-cut answers. In the end, the Masechet ends with this big confusion. We don't know really what Rebbe held. And there's this idea about things pulling you in one direction, things pulling you in another. And what we end up from our learning of Daf Yomi is seeing everything and understanding the concepts. And those concepts is what takes you, right? Because in the end, there aren't always clear-cut answers, but when you understand the concept behind something, it means a lot more to you. And it also helps you when you come into a situation, you remember, right? Like if you think about sukkah, right? Then you sat in your sukkah, you remembered all these concepts that we learned. You might not have remembered everything about it and what's allowed and what's not, but you remembered all the concepts. And that's, I think, what the beauty of learning Daf Yomi is, getting all the concepts behind everything. Even if you don't remember exactly how to do things, fine. You can always go, look in a book or consult a rabbi or anyone who's knowledgeable. There's so many options, but the idea of learning every day is to get this idea and seeing it all of the concepts behind everything. So with that, we'll finish our Masechet. We'll say the last Hadran again, one last time. Hadran alach mashilin pirot uslika Masechet Beitzah. And now I'll pull up the Hadrans. We will say them together. Okay, here goes. We're going to say the first part 3 times. Hadran alach Masechet Beitzah v'hadra chalan. Da'atan alach Masechet Beitzah v'da'ata chalan. Lo nitnashe minach Masechet Beitzah v'lo titnashe minan. Lo ba'alma haden v'lo ba'alma da'ate. Hadran alach Masechet Beitzah v'hadra chalan. Da'atan alach Masechet Beitzah v'da'ata chalan. Lo nitnashe minach Masechet Beitzah v'lo titnashe minan. Lo ba'alma haden v'lo ba'alma da'ate. Hadran alach Masechet Beitzah v'hadra chalan. Da'atan alach Masechet Beitzah v'da'ata chalan. Lo nitnashe minach Masechet Beitzah v'lo titnashe minan. Lo ba'alma haden v'lo ba'alma da'ate. Yehi ratzon mofanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu, shetehe toratcha umanutenu ba'olam hazeh, te'imanu la'olam haba. Hanina bar papa, Rami bar papa, Nachman bar papa, Achai bar papa, Abba bar papa, Rafram bar papa, Rachish bar papa, Surcha bar papa, Ada bar papa, Daru bar papa. Harev na Adonai Eloheinu et divrei toratcha befinu ufipiot amcha Beit Yisrael. V'niyeh anachnu כולנו צאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל, כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה. והווי תחכמני מצוותיך כי לעולם היא לי. יהי ליבי תמים בחוקיך, למען לא אבוש, לעולם לא אשכח פיקודיך, כי בם חייתני, ברוך אתה אדוני למדני חוקיך, אמן, 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 סלע ועד. יהי רצון לפניך אדוני אלוהי, כשם שעזרתני לסיים מסכת ביצה, כן, תעזרני להתחיל מסכתות וספרים אחרים ולסיימם, ללמוד וללמד, לשמור ולעשות ולקיים את כל דברי תלמוד תורתך באהבה. וזכות כל התנאים והאמוראים ותלמידי חכמים, יעמוד לנו ולזרענו, שלא תמוש התורה מפינו ומפי זרענו עד עולם. להתקיים בנו בתהלכך תנחה אותך, בשוכבך תשמור עליך, בכיסות היא תשיחך. כי בי ירבו ימיך ויוסיפו לך שנות חיים, אורך ימים בימינה, שמאלה, עושר וכבוד, אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום. Shekach everybody for finishing, those who came to join us and are not finishing, Shekach to everybody here. So with that, as I said, we saw this case today about Sfekot, and I'm excited to introduce you to Jan van Amerongen, who has committed the last number of years to studying Gemara intensively in GPATS, which is Stern's advanced Gemara program. Now she's studying Migdal Oz's advanced program. And she initiated and taught a beginner's Gemara class last year, which is actually how I found her in the first place. And she clearly has a love for learning and teaching Gemara. And it's great for us to be exposed to new generation of young scholars up and coming. With that, Jen.
Thank you so much. First of all, I wish a big mazal tov to all the Mesayimim and Mesaymot. I myself don't learn Daf Yomi, but it's always so exciting to be part of a Siyum and see people say the words of the Hadran. I was just clicking through and just seeing everyone's mouths moving. So big yasher koach and mazal tov. This summer, I was standing in shul before Musaf, and I took 3 steps back and then 3 steps forward. But I can't tell you what happened afterwards. Though by no means ideal, after many years of repetition, sometimes the words flow out of my mouth without much thought. Then I looked down at my sitter, and my page was open to the end of Shachrit. I thought to myself, did I just say the Shachrit Amida by accident instead of Musaf, or did I just flip accidentally to this page? What do I do now? Doubt is something which comes up all the time in our daily Jewish lives. We're constantly wondering, did I remember to say Birkat HaMazon? Did I count Sfirat HaOmer? Was the spoon that I used meat or dairy? I started spacing out. Where exactly did I get up to in Shmona Esrei? It's no surprise then that doubt plays a major role in Jewish law. The issue of safek, doubt or uncertainty, is a central theme in Masechet Beitzah, as Rabbanit Michal mentioned. The sugya on Daf Gimel is the main source of a general rule concerning cases of uncertainty, that safek d'oraita l'chumra and safek d'Rabbanan l'kula. Meaning, when we have an uncertainty regarding something of biblical origin, then we are expected to proceed stringently. Whereas if it is d'Rabbanan, of rabbinic origin, we can proceed leniently. Let's use some examples to illustrate what exactly this means. So let's take safek d'oraita l'chumra. Imagine you're cooking a beef stew and the recipe calls for par of milk. Sometime after you added a carton, which was sitting on your counter, you realized that you're not sure what you poured into the stew. Was it almond milk or was it cow's milk? Though there might be other things to consider, like how much of the carton you had poured in. On a basic level, this would be a case of safek d'oraita l'chumra, as there is a Torah prohibition to eat meat and milk cooked together. In the case of uncertainty, you would have to proceed stringently, either tossing the soup or seeing if there were any other factors which might allow you to still eat it. Now, safek d'Rabbanan l'kula. Imagine a woman ate meat for lunch, and she generally waits 3 hours between eating meat and dairy. Later in the day, she's in the mood for a dairy snack, happens to all of us, but she's not exactly sure if 3 full hours have passed since she ate her lunch. Did she finish eating at 12:30? Was it 1? The halacha to wait between meat and milk is of rabbinic origin. Therefore, she may proceed leniently and eat. I'd like to explore this basic principle of safek d'oraita l'chumra a little further and try to understand where this concept came from. The Rambam and the Rashba disagreed about the source of this principle. Rambam claims that safek d'oraita l'chumra is of rabbinic origin. In his Hilchot Tumat Meit, Parak Tet Halacha Yud Bet, he states that the Torah only considers a person who is nitma b'tumat vadai, has definitely contracted ritual impurity to be impure. Therefore, in a case of safek, uncertainty, they are considered to be tahor, pure. According to the Rambam, it was the Chachamim who created a halachic safeguard and mandated that someone who is uncertain if they are tameh behave as if they are definitely impure. Therefore, the principle of safek d'oraita l'chumra is only a rabbinic requirement. In the Rambam's Tshuva, he explains how he reached this conclusion that safek d'oraita is a rabbinic safeguard. The Torah says that a mamzer, a child born out of an illicit union, shall not enter the congregation of the Lord. The Gemara in Kiddushin teaches us that the Torah does not allow a mamzer vadai, a definite mamzer, to enter the congregation, but a mamzer safek, a person whose mamzer status is uncertain, may enter. Therefore, the Rambam inferred that the Torah only recognizes definite prohibited statuses, vadai, and safek, a case of uncertainty, would be considered permissible. But the rabbis added a safeguard to ensure that even in cases of uncertainty, we treat them as certainly prohibited. By contrast, Rashba held that the principle of safek d'oraita l'chumra is indeed midoraita, a Torah principle. His main proof is from the concept of an asham taloi. The Torah tells us that if a person sins unwittingly, they would usually bring a korban chatat to atone for their sin. But if they are in doubt whether they sinned, then they would bring an asham taloi, a provisional guilt offering. The Rashba learns from this that if someone is required to bring a korban, even in a case of safek, then clearly the Torah considers them to have sinned. It isn't just that the rabbis created a safeguard, but in fact, the Torah itself considers a safek problematic and requires us to proceed stringently. These two opinions, whether safek d'oraita l'chumra is d'oraita or d'Rabbanan, though they have the same conclusion that we must err on the side of caution, still have important nafkamina, practical halachic implications. The main nafkamina is that of the case of a double doubt or sfek sfeika. Consider the following case. I'm not sure if this piece of meat in front of me is kosher or not. And then it got mixed up with all these other pieces of kosher meat. So now I'm not even sure which piece of meat is the one I wasn't sure about. We generally poskin that in a case of sfek sfeika, a double doubt, we rule leniently. This rule makes sense according to the Rambam. If we are uncertain if the meat is prohibited midoraita, then there's a rabbinic requirement to treat it stringently. Therefore, if we have an additional safek, we don't even know which piece of meat it is that was prohibited rabbinically, well, then that's a safek d'Rabbanan, because the original piece of meat was only prohibited on a rabbinic level. So we would then say safek d'Rabbanan l'kula, and one would be able to eat the meat from the group. How the kula, the leniency of sfek sfeika, works is less clear if we follow the approach of the Rashba. We would have thought that the Rashba would say that since the safek d'oraita l'chumra is from the Torah, then the piece of meat would be prohibited midoraita, not mid'Rabbanan. So if it gets mixed up with other pieces of meat, now we just have another safek d'oraita, which again would require us to treat it stringently. How then would the kula of Spek Sveka work according to the Rashba? Well, the Rashba believed that in Safek Doraita, the Torah tells us to lean stringently. He would say in the case of Spek Sveka, we actually lean leniently because it's actually a different category completely. We should not view Spek Sveka as we have a Safek Doraita and then another Safek Doraita. Rather, it's a totally new category of doubt onto itself. Therefore, the reason why Spek Sveka works is because the Torah tells us that in a regular case of one Safek Doraita, we would have to say Lechumra. But regarding Spek Sveka, a double doubt, the Torah would allow us to proceed leniently. Another practical implication between these two approaches would be the level of obligation in a case of doubt. Let's say a man does not remember if he said Birkat HaMazon. While there is some debate as to a woman's obligation to Birkat HaMazon, all are in agreement that men have a Torah obligation to say Birkat HaMazon. Therefore, this would be a case of Safek Doraita. And we know the rule is Safek Doraita L'chomra. So we would be required to say Birkat HaMazon, possibly for a second time. Now let's say there's another man who needs to say Birkat HaMazon, but for some reason cannot say it himself. Ordinarily, someone would be able to help him by keeping him in his mind while he says his Birkat HaMazon in order to be motzi, this person who cannot say it on their own. But this is only possible when the two men have an equal level of obligation. So according to the Rambam, the man's obligation to repeat Birkat HaMazon, possibly repeat because he's not sure if he said it in the first place, would only be a rabbinic level of obligation. Therefore, he would not be able to be motzi someone who actually had a doraita level obligation of saying Birkat HaMazon. According to the Rashba, however, both men have a doraita obligation, and therefore, the man would be able to be motzi this other man through his Birkat HaMazon. Though there are practical nafkaminas to the different approaches, they share an underlying fundamental point. When we have a doubt, we have to accept that we're not going to be able to resolve it and come to the full truth. This inability to uncover the truth is part of the human condition. God, however, does not have uncertainty. A week ago, we read the first parsha of the Torah, Parsha Bereshit. In recounting the saga of the creation of the world, the Torah tells us, V'yichal Elohim b'yom hashvi'i me'achto asher asah, v'yishbo b'yom hashvi'i mikol me'achto asher asah. On the seventh day, God finished the work that he had been doing and rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. The sages couldn't understand the meaning of this verse. Did God complete his work on the seventh day, or did he rest on the seventh day? He certainly couldn't have rested if he was still completing his work. Rashi on the verse quotes an answer given by Rabbi Shimon in the Midrash. Rabbi Shimon explains that God finished creation during Bein HaShmashot, twilight between the sixth and seventh day. Bein HaShmashot is the epitome of uncertainty in halacha, because as humans, we're not sure at which point the first day has ended and the new day has started. God, however, knew the exact point at which the seventh day began. And so when he truly finished his work, the exact moment before the seventh day began, to the human eye, it appeared as though he had only finished his work on the seventh. And therefore, the verse is written from the human perspective. It is for this reason that we take in Shabbat early and we end it late. We begin Shabbat and light candles at sundown before twilight, and only end Shabbat with Havdalah after the emergence of 3 stars after twilight. Because unlike God, we don't know when the day precisely begins and ends. In this world, we can't make sense of uncertainty. That is reserved for God. But we look forward to a time when there's total clarity and all doubts will disappear. When we have unresolved cases in the Gemara, which I'm sure you might have seen until this point in your Yomi learning. So when we have unresolved cases, which are essentially a suffix as to what the law is, we conclude with the word teku, which literally means the question will stand. But we also have a tradition which understands the word teku as an acronym for Tishbi Yitaretz Kushiot Ubayot, that Eliyahu Tishbi will resolve all questions and problems. Eliyahu Navi is the one who will herald in the coming of Mashiach, and at the same time, usher in a time of clarity, a time when we no longer have confusion and doubt. May we have the strength to contend with the doubts and questions that arise in our lives, whether halachic, is this food kosher, is it not, or existential, when will I find the right job? Where should I send my kids to school? How do I know if I've made the right decision? And we pray for a day when there are no more doubts and only clarity and light.
Amen. Thank you very much, Jen. Rabbanit Billet has spent her life dedicated to teaching Torah as a teacher, principal, shul rebbetzin, kala teacher, mentor, public speaker, yoetzet halacha, everything basically, all possibilities. And she recently just made Aliyah. She personally taught me Torah enrichment when I was younger. I want to say maybe 5th or 6th grade. And while I have to say, I don't remember exactly what we learned together, what I really do remember, which stuck with me to this day, is how much fun it was learning Torah with her. So thank you, Rookie, both for inspiring me then and for continuing to inspire countless others. throughout your life. So we're very happy to have Ruki with us tonight to share some thoughts about the Masechet and her experience learning.
Thank you so much. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, friends. I must say that I'm humbled and grateful to have been invited to say a few words at this incredible gathering about my personal journey to Daf Yomi learning. First, I have to express my gratitude to Hadran and to Rabbanit Michelle Cohen Farber for their contribution to my and all of our reaching this milestone. When Hadran was planning the Siyum Hashas in December 2019, Shoshana Baker reached out to me to help Hadran reach a larger audience of women in the US who might listen to the Siyum and begin learning the Daf. I listened to every word of that groundbreaking Siyum, featuring women speakers that inspired me, I think inspired all of us, and decided then and there to undertake my own study of the Daf Yomi. Like many women of my generation, though I was the beneficiary of a terrific Jewish education at Shulamet School, Yeshiva University High School for Girls, YU's Teachers Institute for Women, Machon Gold, Michlala Yerushalayim, I had been minimally exposed to Talmud study, and only as a source for learning various halachic topics, not as a continuous study of the Daf text on its own. My teachers and my rebbeim included some of the best, including Professor Nechama Leibovitz of blessed memory, and they inspired me to master the Hebrew language that I so strongly believe is the mafteach l'chol limudei hayadut, the key to all Jewish text study, to learn how we can analyze the approaches of different mefarshim, to study the commentaries on the Torah, to study halacha in depth, to become versed in texts like the Rambam's Mishneh Torah, the Shulchan Aruch, the Chafetz Chaim's Mishnah Berurah, and so much more. During the study of practical halacha, our teachers brought occasional sugyot of the Gemara as sources, but we never learned Talmud as a regular shiur with all the argumentative give and take, the shaklavataria of the Beit Midrash. When I was fortunate to have a sabbatical year in Israel in the senior educators program at Hebrew University, I studied with Rabbanit Malka Bina's Talmud class at Matan, and I learned how much I lacked in the way of Talmud skills. After many years as a Judaic studies classroom teacher and high school assistant principal, I was invited to serve as principal of Mayanot Yeshiva High School for Girls in Teaneck, a school founded on the concept that Talmud is a subject to be studied by every single girl in the school. As a lifelong learner myself, that mission intrigued me, and I embraced the concept and the goal, even though my own substantial Jewish education missed that component. 6 years at the helm of Mayanot, which was founded with the Haskama and the support of its unique mission with Rav Aharon Lichtenstein Zatzal, and my knowledge that Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik Zatzal had endorsed and supported the initial introduction of the study of Gemara at Stern College, they all served to help me think it was not too late for me to begin the regular study of Talmud. But the journey still has some intervening stations. When the close to 3-hour daily commute to Teaneck from my home in the Five Towns became just too much, I was fortunate to be appointed principal at Shulamet School for Girls in Cedarhurst, Shulamet, the place where I had begun, a few minutes from my house. With the newfound time in my life, I was again most fortunate to be accepted to the Yoetzet Halacha learning program, training program sponsored by Nishmat, the Jeannie Schottenstein Center for Advanced Torah Study for Women, under the leadership of Rabbanit Chana Henkin, despite not having studied Talmud in depth during my life. I applied myself with determination and with commitment to the exceedingly demanding program of the course of 2 intense years and 3 summers. Baruch Hashem, shortly after I graduated and I was certified as a Yoetzet Halacha in 2015, I was looking for a new project. Rav Aaron Blatt, a member of the rabbinic staff at our shul, the Young Israel of Woodmere, was recruiting people to begin the new cycle of Mishnah Yomit, learning the 6 Sidarim of the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah over the course of about 6 years, learning 2 Mishnayot a day. Several of my grandsons had actually accomplished this, and I was inspired to follow them in their way. And I must say, I'm also grateful to both Rav Kahati for his incredible work on explaining the Mishnah in Ivrit, and to Art Scroll for the Mishnah elucidated in English. And I was able to complete the 6 sections of the Mishnah in about 5 years, and made a Siyum last January in honor of the yahrzeit of my parents, Aleichem Hashalom, after I had already begun the study of the Daf Yomi with Rabbanit Michelle, after the worldwide Siyum Hashas inspired so many of us women to undertake the Daf. The background from the study of the Mishnah, the support and encouragement of my husband, children, and extended family, the clarity and enthusiasm of Rabbanit Michelle's shiur, following along with her podcast in my Art Scroll Gemara, using other Sifrei Ezer, maps, and illustration have all helped, especially in the most challenging Masechet we've learned thus far, like Amerongen and Yomi. And they've all contributed to the pleasure I have taken in this new chapter of my learning. As we all know, as students of the Talmud, it is not easy. It requires tremendous discipline. And because my personality is not the type that can deal well with falling behind, I need to be truly consistent. Other students have advised me that even when I don't always understand everything, it's important to keep going and plowing through, and that the second time around, it will certainly be easier. For me, the challenge is to try to follow the machlokot, the differences of opinion, and to try to predict before I read them how the various opinions in the disputes follow through on determining the answers to the next problem that the Gemara raises. In Chumash, the Mefarshim often have consistent approaches, but I am not familiar enough with the Tanaim and Amoraim to detect such consistencies. The joys are the sense of progress toward a shared goal, and the enhancement of the observance of the holidays by the timely study of Psachim, Yoma, and Sukkah precisely in their seasons this year. The Agadot about the rabbis of the Talmud often make both the halachot and the personalities come alive. And it's always interesting to see how much math and science the rabbis understood so many years ago, even pi and constellations, etc. Another perk is the amazing camaraderie of our Long Island Hadran Women's WhatsApp group, and I'm sure other WhatsApp groups are the same, where we share our woes as well as our victories and support each other when coping with difficult sections and sugyot. We have managed to sometimes get together to celebrate Siyumei Masechet in person, outdoors, even during Corona. One should not take leave of friends without a short word of Torah. I try to make brief notes on Post-its when an important idea appears, and the statement on Daf Bet of Beitzah suggesting that we might say, Kocha dehetera adif, a lenient approach to psak is preferable, brought me back to Rabbi Aharon Rakefet's class on responsive literature in Michlala, 1973. I'm sure before many of you were born. He taught us the introduction of Rav Moshe Feinstein to his Zigrot Moshe, the amazing collection of responses to halachic questions posed to the Rosh Yeshiva over the course of many decades. Rav Moshe wrote both about his trepidation, about the responsibility to deduce the halacha properly based on precedents and principles, and about his commitment to the concept that the power of permissibility, kocha dehetera, is preferred, adif, whenever that is possible. The koach of heter, leniency, is based on love, on understanding, and on compassion for the person asking the question, who wants to do sincere avodat Hashem, but may be in a challenging halachic situation. The Ramban in Shmot 20 discusses the difference between Zachor, the positive mitzvot of Shabbat, and Shamor, the prohibitions of Shabbat. Positive commandments, the Ramban states, are observed from the midah of love, ahava, and negative commandments are driven by yirah, awe. The Rambam declares, ha'ahava gedola min ha'yirah, love is greater than awe. I think we all agree that the commitment to Daf Yomi is an act of love. The love for Torah and for Talmidot that we see on a daily basis from Rabbanit Michelle, the love of learning of all of us women worldwide who care deeply for Hashem Yitbarach, for his Torah, and for his people, and for the continuity of Jewish history. May this love continue to motivate us to work together to enhance and glorify the study and observance of Torah. Lahagdil Torah ulahadira. Thank you so much for sharing this adventure with me and for listening to my journey, and I'm sure thinking about your own.
Wow, that was really inspirational. Thank you everyone again for coming. Thank you for being part of this. And if you're not yet part of one of our Hadran groups, as Rabbanit Billet said, please join one of our Hadran groups, like our Facebook page, our Instagram posts, help spread the love of learning that you have, help spread to other people. I always think if we've gotten to this many people at this point, think about how many more people we can get to. So help share the love. And with that, I will wish everyone a good night. And luckily, we'll be seeing you in another month because we have a Siyum in a month. So Bezrat Hashem, we will have month after month for a few months till we get to then a bit of a dry spell after that. So enjoy the Siyumim, the celebrations. And we look forward to seeing you in another month, or join on the daily Zoom if that works for you as well.
And you can now mute yourselves if you want to say anything. But yes, thank you all for joining, being here with us tonight.
Mazel tov, everybody.
Mazel tov.
Thank you.
Mazel tov.
Thank you.
Mazel tov.
Mazel tov.
Thank you so much. And the last speaker is so inspirational. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Mazel tov.
Yasher koach, Michelle.
Thank you. Talk to everybody.
Thank you so much. Yasher koach.
Yes, everybody.
Thank you.
So class Monday morning.
Tomorrow morning, a few hours from now.
Here
Rosh Hashanah starts tomorrow.
Thank you, Michelle.
Unbelievable.
Great. No breaks.
Have a break today. Thank you, Hadran, for a wonderful Siyum. See you tomorrow.
I had no idea what could have distracted you today from that key, Michelle. No idea at all.
From what?
From picking up the key. I don't know what was
Oh, yes. Yes, I was going to say that it was the distraction from the learning Torah. Yeah, that would be untrue.
Thank you for the inspiration.
Yeah, tomorrow morning.
Yeah, of course you do.
Thank you all. You're welcome to join us at the Hebrew Siyum, which is starting in about 30 minutes.
Oh, you go to the Hebrew Siyum.
So those of you who are coming with us there, we'll see you soon.
You can come
Good
join
night, everyone,
late
and
since
have a
you
great
heard the daf,
Sunday.
and come in if you want a little bit later for the other
true.
shiurim.
And thank you for the whole
Thanks again, Michelle.
Erev Tov. Fabulous.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Wonderful.